remember that along with 3 or 4 other members of the cast who had parts in the first act, going into the newsroom and seeing all the boards lit up, nobody was there. The girls had all gone home, and we picked up the phones. And it was shocking to hear what they said to us and how they yelled at us and cursed at us. Our argument was, well, why don't you tune in some others? You find out that this is not all over America. This is not all over New York. There's no monsters outside from Mars. For God's sake, wait till the second half of the show. And then finally someone got in touch with Paley and said, my God, the studio is going crazy. The whole city of New York is up in arms. In Harlem, people were jumping out of windows. And that's the thing that, I felt badly about. And cars, for some reason, along the Pulaski Skyway in Jersey City, cars were going 75 miles an hour in traffic.
I was on one of the phones at CBS when Orson Welles had his War of the Worlds thing, and everybody was at a phone. It was frantic. So believable. They were frightened, really frightened people were calling. But it certainly caused a lot of new directions in the radio business. They had to be informed if there was any even remote possibility of anybody getting frightened that this was a radio broadcast and was not real,
I think that when we got back to the theater and he saw his wife was in the show and all of his actors, he was a little bit leery about what was going to happen. Houseman, his partner, said it was a Halloween trick. Well, it wasn't a Halloween trick. It was done in dead seriousness. It wasn't meant as a trick at all. Because of the situation in Europe, that there was a very nervous thing. During the broadcast, I saw a bunch of policemen in the foyer outside of the door to the studio. I thought, I don't think he's being scared into this. I think he's worried that there's going to be an uprising. Well, there wasn't. There were people that got into their cars and drove, but I don't know whether they were going to drive. Where were you going to drive to get away from the Martians?
Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
On October 30th, 1938, CBS broadcast the 17th episode of Orson Welles' Mercury Theater on the air. It was an adaptation of H.G. Wells' science fiction masterpiece, The War of the Worlds.
Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
Many listeners missed the opening introductions of the Mercury Theater, identifying the show as an adaptation, because they were too busy listening to Nelson Eddy's opening music number on NBC's Chase and Sanborn Hour. Opposite the Chase and Sanborn Hour's commercial and guest drama scene was the portion of the War of the Worlds after the Martians landed and the capsule finally opened. It was here that many Americans tuned their dial from NBC to CBS.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmer's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain's conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object, while the captain and 2 policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However,
by the 40-minute mark of the broadcast, pandemonium had broken out in CBS's Madison Avenue studios.
Fifth Avenue. 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
Calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ. 2X2L calling CQ, New York. Is there anyone on the air? Is there anyone on the air? Isn't there anyone?
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, starring Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air.
At this intermission point, listeners were finally cued in that this was just a dramatization, spearheaded by Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater. They had been deceived. In the end, the Martians were defeated, but not by man, by Earth's diseases. When the final curtain closed, Welles, now out of character, took to the air.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
But America wasn't laughing. The world in October of 1938 was very close to war. People enjoyed being scared, so long as they knew it was pretend, and Welles had blurred the lines between truth and fiction. The next morning, in front of reporters, news cameras, and radio microphones, he issued an explanation and public apology while fielding questions.
Quiet. You want me to speak now? I'm sorry. Of course, we are deeply shocked and deeply regretful about the results of last night's broadcast. The date of the broadcast was 1939, and it came rather as a great surprise to us that a story, fine H.G. Wells' classic fantasy, the original for so many succeeding comic strips and adventure stories and novels, about a mythical invasion by monsters from the planet Mars should have had so profound an effect upon radio listeners, seemed to us to be clearly in the realm of the fairy tale. Deeply regretful that this is not so.
Welles was publicly remorseful, but his ruse had worked. By December, Campbell's Soups signed on as a sponsor, and programs like this were here to stay.